Hi everyone, my name is Andre Stoika, and I am a reporter and citizen journalist here in Kansas City, Missouri, and I'm also the founder of Independent Media Association, which is a citizen journalism project that started about a couple years ago. Um, I am a white male with black facial hair, small beard, dark short hair right now, wearing glasses and dressed in a black shirt. Behind me there is a painting over my right shoulder and a bookshelf over my left. And today we are actually going to talk a little bit about what is citizen journalism. Um, a sort of introduction to citizen journalism, and we're going to go through a few definitions and the way that our organization does things, as well as how other forms of citizen journalism can present themselves. So, first, what is citizen journalism? Um, the basic points are that it is media. It can be live stream, videos, articles, a lot of different forms that uses the style and tools of journalism. News style stories, which can be live reporting, interviews, editorials, even, to tell stories that the citizen journalists are witnessing. And that term, witnessing, actually comes from Stuart Allen's book, Citizen Witnessing, in which he actually describes citizen journalism as a type of first person reporting, usually done by inexperienced people, a lot of times in moments of crisis, and obviously very unplanned, where normal average citizens find themselves in the role of a journalist. So it is usually done by people who have little or no professional experience in journalism. And it's also beyond the witnessing function that we just mentioned. That goes to documenting and preserving the events that the journalist believes deserve to be remembered or at least explored. And as long as journalists follow press law, citizen journalists are entitled to the same protections and access that other members of the media have. Um, Also, along that, citizen journalists are expected to abide by journalistic ethics and standards, which can be, the baseline for that is there is the Journalistic Ethics Guide by the Association of Journalists, I believe, here in the US. That kind of is a really good baseline for that. But essentially, the ethics guide obviously boils down to not taking gifts, stating if you have a vested interest in the story that you're following, and so on, which is, again, to meet the journalist standard, which can come under scrutiny in different forms. But, again, citizen journalism can be performed by anyone, regardless of their education and even their equipment, as I'm actually going to talk a little bit here in a second about kind of how we do things as IMA, as a news organization, which is another form that citizen journalism can take. So let's talk a little bit about those different forms. They can be live streams, social media posts, photojournalism type stuff, which can be just photos with captions, wiki news type organizations, blogging, news style blogs, environmental blogs actually have had a presence in citizen journalism, specifically climate change blogs. Activist rhetoric as well, and then again, news blogs and news websites, which is what our organization is, um, and war live streams, war footage, which has actually become very important recently, especially with the developing war in the Ukraine that is ongoing right now. A lot of that footage is important because news media does not necessarily have access to those areas, but they can use that footage after they validate it and substantiate it, essentially, and then they can disseminate it. Now, when we talk about different forms of citizen journalism, we do have to acknowledge that in America specifically, citizen journalism has actually been essentially kind of taken by a majority of more alt-right type news organizations. And those can be anything from Alex Jones, for example, to Breitbart and social media or YouTube commentators as well. Now, for us, when we see that, we notice a need to try to balance some of that rhetoric. And the way that we see that we have an ability to do that is by actually following the practice of black feminism, specifically Patricia Hill Collins, in which we center the most marginalized voice in the room and we start our stories there. Black feminism has also influenced us in the way that we focus on allowing the person who we talk to identify themselves and have agency over their story. And of course, also abolition work. So a lot of our work is guided by scholars such as Bell Hooks, Audre Lorde, and Angela Davis, especially towards more the abolition and vision aspect of trying to imagine something different. And that is where our approach to citizen journalism comes in. Now, we see that when citizen journalists practice this approach with centering the most marginalized person first, that can lead towards interactions from citizen journalists and asking better questions. And that comes from engaging with the community. And one example I can actually give is the work that IMA has done with Kansas City Homeless Union, a group here in Kansas City that is organized towards bringing attention to the needs of homeless people within Kansas City. And where we started in that process, and again, this is being guided by Patricia Hill Collins's teaching and our implementation of the practice of speaking to the most marginalized most marginalized voice in the room first. In that situation, that being Qadafi, who was the leader and organizer of KCHU, the homeless union. Now, when that first started, the first interaction with Qadafi was actually an interview that was run in full, with just an intro added to it, and that was a way to preserve the voice of the speaker and to allow them autonomy and agency over their own story. And again, that's borrowed from other scholars in Black feminism. And after that, we were able to continue to follow the story alongside KCHU and to see their efforts and their needs and their demands develop over the course of a year and a half. One interesting way that actually helped us become better journalists was that we were able to take their concerns and questions and present them later to the actual city government and city council meetings. And that's actually a dynamic that citizen journalists sometimes can find themselves in, where they have to navigate the more formal space, in which it becomes a little bit more important to present yourself as press and to adhere by press standards and ethics, which again, press standards, for example, means that you are there with intent to disseminate and intent to document, and you are there to do that. But we were able to take those questions from Qadafi, from KCHU, and ask them directly to the mayor, and see his response, and in turn take that and present it further as dialogue to try to bridge that gap between the homeless organizers and possibly the public. But beyond that, it also allows an exploration to align yourself more towards something that can be considered solution-based journalism, where the story is followed towards the work being done to resolve the problem. And a very important distinction that has to be made in solution-based journalism and how citizen journalists can practice it is that a lot of times solution-based journalism does not always come from the people who are closest to the problem, who are also closest to the solution, as Qadafi, the organizer of KCHU, mentions. So with that in mind, we are able to see the solutions that are proposed by the people involved in it, and again, centering their voice and their story alongside their agency. With, again, with their focus in mind, and allowing them to control the narrative that we are going to put out as media, which is where we can use our resources to create that. And now, for a lot of citizen journalists, those resources are very DIY, so they can start with almost anything. A phone, a notepad, anything that can document events and present footage in a journalistic style. And what I want to mention is live stream footage, actually, again, having a very important emphasis. One example that I can give towards that is the death of George Floyd, which was captured by Darnella Frazier, who in the moment went from a citizen witness to a citizen journalist through the footage that she was able to capture. And that footage actually was very important and recognized as journalistic, as of journalistic importance, by even being awarded a Pulitzer Prize, which is one of the highest awards in journalism. So that shows that a lot of times the tools on hand can be enough to perform the job of press or media. For us at IMA, we have 4 principles actually that we use in our work. And one of those principles is that you do not need fancy equipment or degrees for citizen journalism. And that's actually based in a very DIY approach to how we do things and how we need to do things. And also an emphasis on, again, removing barriers and barriers of entry into the media. One being a college degree or high education that is not necessarily needed to perform the job of journalism, of a journalist, especially if you have an ability to write stories or be a good interviewer, follow a story, or other skills that you can have that you can bring, which can look like social media management, camera work, production footage. There is a lot of different ways that you can apply the skills you already have to citizen journalism. So again, one of them is DIY, and our phones are becoming a very quick way to document and use platforms to help narratives develop. Now, another mention in that ties into some of the stuff that I spoke of earlier is that citizen journalism, like any journalism, is not necessarily objective, can't always be, but it should always be balanced. Um, and the best way for a citizen journalist to do that is to listen to stories and then to do research that'll give those stories context. So again, it starts with um, that focus on the most marginalized being allowed to address their own needs. With that in mind, citizen journalism should be about people and lived experiences. Facts, reports, data, and numbers should be tied to lived experience, um, to the experience of those most impacted, or otherwise that information doesn't really matter. And coming back to the solution focused method, citizen journalism should be solution focused, and highlighting those solutions not only mean doesn't only mean centering the needs and voice and solutions of those affected, but it also often means staying there for the full story and for the full length of what's happening. And sometimes that can also mean developing relationships so you can come back and follow up with a story later that can take years to develop. That, to me personally, is one of the strengths of citizen journalism that a lot of times mainstream media falls short of. Mainstream media a lot of times tends to sensationalize a story, tends to stay for the headline and the soundbite and then check out and then move on to the next event. That's not necessarily to say that they're not doing a job of obtaining and disseminating information, but at least from my work and perspective, in order to build a path towards solutions, you usually need to follow the community itself closer. So citizen journalists usually do tend to have a position that allows them to do that more freely, and a position to move into the more formal space where they can take the concerns and questions of the community and pass them on with again control and agency over those demands, and to create that dialogue, and also to show the audience who might not know that the dialogue can be possible, that it exists, and encourage the audience to get involved. Now, actually, in the kind of closing here and touching on what I just said in the getting involved aspect, anyone can, if they choose to, enter the field of citizen journalism. It can look like a lot of different things, like I mentioned, from live stream footage to blog posts to social media captions, and many different ways that, again, the person's already developed skills can be applied towards. Beyond that, beyond the equipment, the ethics aspect we're going to talk about in a separate video, I believe. But again, that just means having, behaving with in a trustworthy manner in order to develop those relationships that allow you to explore the needs of a community. Without that trust, that is extremely important, and that you can't develop those, and you really can't do a good enough job to capture the full story if you don't have that. Again, that trust also means being honest with yourself. Sometimes a lot of the stuff that you see will challenge your own perspectives. Being able to respond to that and to listen to people's lived experiences who might challenge your own assumptions is part of a growth that citizen journalists do, that I don't necessarily think that mainstream media does. Again, because of the way that they format things to be more sensational and more digestible, I would say, and soundbite type stuff. But again, with that in mind, citizen journalism is something that can be applied in many different aspects in many different ways, from activism to local politics to even entertainment media and different forms that the creator feels they want to apply this type of filter towards. But again, for our organization, we try to empower citizen journalists to write stories from their own lives or from their communities that they're close to. Stories that the mainstream media might not see, stories that don't necessarily have the flashiness of some of the bigger pieces that you see in the media. Now, I do want to acknowledge that there are a lot of other citizen journalists doing a lot of this type of work, sometimes unnoticed. And we are actually going to probably link a few examples, but I believe, organizations like Free Press, for example, who are doing a lot of work in the field of citizen journalism, have again explored the need for citizen journalists, actually, especially as bigger media tends to overlook a lot of these smaller stuff. But again, with that in closing, I want to encourage people to seek out resources, which includes our own resources on our page at independentmedia.us. We do have some educational materials that we are trying to develop in order to encourage more citizen journalists to step out and cover stories that might not get attention otherwise. That information is going to be, some of it's going to be available. We're going to also have a few more videos in the series alongside information in the links and description. But if you can't get access to those, you can also email us at independentmediaus@gmail.com. You can also feel free to email us if you want to join, learn more about, or just discuss citizen journalism in general. And again, I want to thank everyone who joined our video. I also want to encourage you to find more about this by watching the next one in the series. And thank you for joining me.